On the fateful day, the girl plunged a sharp sword into the chest of a man. The victim was an emperor named Genfried. Finding more strength to speak, the guy looked at her with an astonished look, cursing her. His murderer was Carnophilia. She behaved calmly and indifferently towards him and did not regret that she had done so. He did not mind dying in this way and gloated if this was the price for the death of the heroine from the curse. Yenfried called the girl's act a stupid and ridiculous way to attract attention to her beloved. Putting pressure on the patient, if he were in his place, he would not grieve and miss her after her death. Despite his high status, he is unable to forgive his wife's misdeed. He will continue to look at her with disgust and condemnation because she has turned his country into ruins. As soon as he started talking about her lover, Carnophilia shuddered and doubted her actions. Looking at him, the girl could not concentrate under the pressure of his words, but losing to someone like him was not in her plans. She knew perfectly well that if she killed the emperor, she would be overtaken by a quick death, and the curse would not give her a chance for a second life. Carnophilia did not care about the consequences, and with a confident movement she struck a fatal blow. The emperor had fallen, which meant that there was nothing else to hold her in this world, and that was the price of blessing. Tears appeared on the girl's face, which she could not stop, in the hope that her lover would live happily. When Carnophilia finally lost control of her body, she fell into eternal sleep with the feeling that someone was holding her warmly. She remembered the distinct scent of a familiar person and how his fingers touched his cheek, but this feeling quickly faded away and everything came to an end. When the heroine was at a young age, all she wanted in this life was to see his smile again. The young man smiled back at her, and she lit up her face like the sun, an image that looked like a prince from fairy tales. Standing next to his brother, he realized that the boy had attracted his sister's attention. Carnophilia looked away with embarrassment because he was the only one she showed sympathy for. Losing track of time, the girl woke up and ran to the mirror, realizing that she had become a child. This meant only one thing: the heroine went back in time to her childhood. The empire was ruled by a family blessed by God, and whoever dared to kill them would be damned forever. It was a legend that had been born since the beginning of the empire, thus warning everyone of the consequences of rebelling against the imperial family. Among their family there was a second princess. The distinguishing feature of the family was golden hair, but she had black locks like night. And this child was the main character. Dark hair is considered unlucky and brought continuous bad luck to the family. The father chose the perfect name for his daughter. On that day he named her after the poisonous flower, Carnophilia, or the cursed princess. Everyone tried to avoid the princess, but there was one person who dared to approach and confide. It was the nanny. She was sure that after killing her brother with her own hands, the curse had overtaken her. But looking in the mirror, convinced of the reality of what was happening, she admitted that she had returned to the past. She was weak and fragile, no pain was felt, and this meant only one thing: that the curse had taken effect. When the nanny returned, the woman brought a glass of water and was glad to see her mistress's smile and how she brought confidence. But the girl felt only one irritation when she felt her presence. She was well aware that the nanny could have mixed poison into a glass of water, because it was she who weakened the girl's body and mind. Carnophilia wanted to catch her and asked for a drink of water to see the reaction, and she agreed. When the nurse left, she was surprised that the girl seemed to know about her intentions and suspected something was wrong. Quite a lot of time passed. Each time she bullied the heroine until she got sick, and then stopped until she got better. After finishing breakfast, the girl wanted to express her gratitude to those who brought her medicines by turning to the nanny. She knew perfectly well that no one cared about her except for the nanny, and this should have caused panic, because the donors were lies. The woman got out of the situation and expressed gratitude on her behalf, but Carnophilia had other plans and would visit someone on her own. She was sure that the nanny would be busy cleaning and would be able to take a bath herself, and hurriedly closed the door behind her. Looking into the water, the girl was visited by different thoughts and how difficult it was for her to gather her strength. After a while, Carnophilia and her nurse walked down the corridor, listening to the conversations of the servants, who condemned her from head to toe. She tried to dissuade her, as it was not too late to change her mind, but they were already standing in front of His Majesty's reception room. They were met by a chamberlain who wanted to turn her back, but Carnophilia called him heartless, because this was her daughter's first visit to her father. The least he could do was to inform the head of the family about her arrival to see him, and the man asked to wait. The doors opened in front of the girl, and she turned to the nanny, who diligently tried to stop her, but she asked to stay away. Entering the reception room, my father was sitting at the table, and this time they met much earlier than expected. He had golden hair, which only confirmed his belonging to the imperial family. She bowed to her father, calling him the son of the empire, and introduced herself by her full name. Getting straight to the point, the heroine informed him that someone was mixing poison into her food and medicines, hinting that it was her father's order. The man only suggested the possibility of his intervention, to which Carnophilia thanked for the answer. She was about to leave, but her father asked her to stay, as he did not hear an answer. She had no right to make a mistake, and she didn't have to worry. The head of the family wanted to know how his daughter would react if he really gave her poison. Her father's excitement played into her hands. She wanted him to worry about Carnophilia's well-being. He was amazed by her audacity and the way her daughter confidently spoke about her death, even though she looked as if she was about to lose consciousness. He liked that she wasn't afraid to talk to him and repeated the words, how she would do her best to push him to death. When she offered to commit suicide right away, it alerted the girl, and the uncertainty took a stronger turn. To prove the truth, she bit her tongue and a trickle of blood began to flow out of her mouth. The father was worried and did not understand his daughter's motives, and a servant helped to wipe away the blood. The emperor exhaled heavily and compared her to a fox, as she was cunning, and she began to walk on thin ice. He asked to testify about the culprit and assumptions about who could have poisoned the food, but she preferred to remain silent because the heroine had other plans. The man thought that she would ask to save her life, and not about the possibility of joining the fight for the throne, and the birth of Carnophilia was the right decision of his ex-wife. At night, she had a terrible dream in which she was breathing heavily and trying to run away from someone. She was chased by her older brother, who crept up from behind and found his sister. Only his voice made her wake up from the nightmare. The girl's body still had not recovered and could not withstand the great stress. Although she felt better after proper nutrition, it was still difficult to get used to the young body, and she decided to refresh herself. It was cool outside and the bright moon lit up the girl's face. Thoughts about the future did not let her go. But only one thing remained unchanged in this world, and that was that Carnophilia still had no one on her side, and no one could defend her. The heroine wants to find a person on whom she can rely and trust. Now the girl will try to make sure that the curse cannot affect her beloved. Early in the morning, the chamberlain entered the princess's chambers with a couple of servants, which surprised the nurse. Carnophilia was happy to see him, which meant that her father allowed her to participate in the struggle for the throne. For the first time, someone entered the manor on their own initiative, since the nanny always made decisions for her who could be let in and who could be chased away. The girl's words were taken seriously by the servants, who looked at her with contempt. The man came closer and asked to leave the new servants, and they would be able to do more than the nanny and remain faithful to the end. He also had a letter with him from the emperor to the girl's request, and from himself, he added that he advised to beware of the second prince. Carnophilia feared no repercussions and showed a letter in front of her that is proof of her confidence in fighting for the throne with those who seek harm. The chief chamberlain served the emperor for many years and witnessed various atrocities committed by his father. Therefore, he was sure that his advice would help the princess stay alive, but looking at her, he only saw a smile, as if the future was in her hands. The man did not understand how she could be confident in herself and not show weakness. Carnophilia knew that she could win, since she had already challenged the emperor, and she could not just sit idly by. The chamberlain began to understand the girl's course of action a little. He realized that the princess and the emperor were equal to each other. When he left, the nanny entered the room and began to ask for the details of the conversation. The heroine of the show gave her father's answer and said that now she could not sit in the shadows. After a while, she met her new servants, among whom there was not a single knight. They were polite and well-trained in their work, but to the girl's eyes, none of them seemed completely devoted to her. She asked all but 2 of the servants to come out, as they had never met before. After questioning the man, Carnophilia noticed that the maid was mute and would not be able to prove her loyalty in words, but could speak by her actions. This was a sign for her, as the guy advised her to stay away from her. Before he could finish speaking, he fell dead to the floor. The girl eliminated him in one action and silently stood over his body, waiting for the princess's reaction. But she threw herself into her arms, recognizing her as an old acquaintance, Lel. Carnophilia was always lonely, because everyone who showed kindness to her soon died or left her forever, and one of them was Lel. She tried to push away anyone who approached. Each time she avoided her, forcing her not to stay with her, but she still supported Carnophilia to the end. One day, Lel's fate overtook her and she fell at the hands of Genfried, not allowing anyone to approach her sister, making her suffer from loneliness. Now she stands before her and makes a promise that she will eliminate enemies until her death, and was the only one Carnophilia could trust. When the nanny entered the room, she was horrified to see the guy's body, and the heroine rushed to her, talking about how scared she was. She told her about what had happened and how the servant suddenly lost consciousness, and the woman could not just believe her words. Gathered with the servants in the dining room, Carnophilia did not take her eyes off the food, thinking about the presence of poison, drawing attention to herself. As soon as the heroine had breakfast, she deliberately admitted that it made no sense for the servants to poison the food and was looking forward to the next meal. She needed to find her man among the servants who was devoted with all his heart, and turned to Lel. She brought up the topic of the blessing of the imperial family and its awareness of the consequences of the assassination attempt. Carnophilia told the whole truth and how the curse gave her a second life, and how Lel tried to protect the princess. Sadly restraining her hand, she confessed her helplessness and how she could not save the servants from death. Now everything was different, and the girl intends to become an empress and destroy the empire, protecting the man she loves. Lel fell to her knees. She believed the princess and could not doubt the truthfulness of the words, and Carnophilia asked to be on the alert. The heroine knew that serving the cursed princess would not be easy, but her desire was a law for a servant. Unlike her, the nanny was never faithful to the girl, and the owner offered her a handsome reward for serving the princess. She believed that the second prince would eventually ascend to the throne, and the reward was close to her, as the princess was weak and in a way she was having fun. Carnophilia was of royal blood, and had the princess herself under her control, whom she could dispose of as her soul wished. But after a while, she began to understand that the girl was different from her usual self. She needed to regain control over her and be aware of what was happening. The heroine tried to get the nanny out by asking about the guy who was to become a servant, listing possible candidates who could send him. To cover for Lel, she told her that he had committed suicide and told her not to leave the palace, which alerted the nanny. But she immediately rushed into her arms because she believed that she would protect her and always be there, and therefore she had nothing to fear. Rumors about Carnophilia and her struggle for the throne spread throughout the empire, and this attracted a young man who was supposed to introduce himself to the second prince. This guy was Nazcan. He was not interested in gossip about the princess and did not attach any importance to it. She called Yenfried a cold-blooded and ruthless person who could cause turmoil in the country, and the princess's debut was an obstacle for him. At night, an unknown man burst into Carnophilia's house and put a knife to her throat. The girl wanted to know his identity, but he was silent, and the princess smiled, calling Lel to her. She ordered her to deal with the man and get rid of him, making sure that everyone knew about the invasion. The servant checked the mercenaries' clothes and handed him the poison pill they wanted to poison. The next day, the incident spread throughout the mansion, and a couple of knights entered the heroine's chambers for a search. As it turned out, it was an order from a superior, and Carnophilia indicated her position and her well-being. The knight did not hide his arrogance in front of the princess, and deception would not pass him by, but the girl took a formidable position. She touched on the work of the knights and how they let the killer pass by them. These words made the man begin to worry about himself. Carnophilia gave the go-ahead to search the room, but asked for time to change clothes and turned to the servant so that she would not get into conflicts. The princess asked not to interfere in her affairs and to continue to do surveillance in order to survive. After leaving the mansion, the girl couldn't remember the last time she walked outside, and she wasn't worried that someone might be following her, as everyone was busy preparing for the holiday. She was interested in the ghost of the imperial family. It was an unfortunate soul who was still looking for her daughter and son, whom she lost in the struggle for the throne. The site was filled with yellow flowers, which symbolized longing and sadness. As she walked on, she met a woman who was sitting alone, and she turned her gaze to Carnophilia. She hugged the girl, calling her Marie, confusing her with her deceased daughter, but there was no feeling in her actions. Behind them, footsteps were heard. They were guards, and the princess hid in the bushes, trying to hear what the knights were saying. The woman grabbed one of the men by the hand, addressing him as a son. They immediately retreated, calling her crazy, reminding her of the fate of children. Although she has gone mad, she was once the empress of the empire, but now she can only accept insults addressed to her. When the guards left, the woman invited Carnophilia to come inside and talk in silence. The heroine got down to business and considers her ally, as they have a common enemy, a man who awaits the death of the current retinue in the empire. She asks for support for the princess's position, being in the shadows all this time, allowing everything that was dear to her to be taken away. Therefore, she had plans to take away the empire and end impunity. It was hard for her to understand the princess's intentions, but she could see how her words were filled with determination. She would give her the help she needed and protect what belonged to her and Carnophilia, but she had one condition. The heroine had to allow her to behead Rachel, the mother of the second prince and the current empress of the empire. The girl agreed, although she did not expect that she would want to take part in this, and the woman smiled. Carnophilia warned that the emperor would soon visit her and she needed to behave in the same way as when she was empress. As a thank you and a personal meeting, she gave her a small box. It was a white dress that had previously belonged to Princess Marie. It was sewn by herself for her birthday, but there was no opportunity to give it away, so she decided to give it to Carnophilia. The girl accepted the gift and now she had to return to her birdcage, having previously hidden the box. The chamberlain was already waiting for her in the room, calling the trip to the Empress reckless, which would entail consequences. As he left, she was approached by Lel, who had returned from a mission that Carnophilia had given her. It was a search for a bottle of poison, ordering to throw it discreetly into the pocket of the nanny. The servant's gaze fell on her hands, which were bruised, as the princess had to dig a hole to store her dress. She was worried about her health and gently clenched her hands, and Carnophilia thanked her for her care. In the evening, the emperor went to the chambers of his wife, whom he did not visit for a long time, although she was no longer the empress. Arelatina was already waiting for him in the room, so she had prepared in advance before his arrival and greeted him. He took her cheek, worried that his wife still held a grudge against him. She would remember her children for the rest of her life, but she needed to stick to the plan and accepted affection from the emperor. Tears welled up on Arelatine's face, and she complained about her position, reminding her of her promise to make her a noble woman of the empire. She clung to him and asked him to fulfill his request, wishing to see the emperor from time to time. The next day, servants gathered in Carnophilia's chambers, apologizing to her for their mistake and for not being able to protect her. The heroine understood how much the reputation of the employees had been shaken, but there was no sincerity in their words and asked them to leave. The princess called one of the maids and asked her to bring books to read. When she wanted to leave the room, she was confronted by a nanny who was angrily looking for Carnophilia. Entering the chambers, the woman hit the heroine in the face, proving her words that she was in danger outside the room. She spoke of trust, that there was no one else who aroused confidence, and the princess began to talk about the poison which strained the nanny. Kneeling, Carnophilia begged for forgiveness with a smile on her face and asked not to put any more poison in the food. Continuing to list her demands, the nanny asked to stop, worried that someone could hear them. Her fears were real, and there was a maid sitting outside the door who had heard their entire conversation and was horrified by what she heard. The woman roughly took her hand, calling what she said a lie, and the princess interrupted in mid-sentence. She asked who could have poisoned her food besides her, since the nanny was the only person who always stayed there. Listening to the conversation, the maid could not believe in the cruelty of the nurse and could not move. The maid did not know who to turn to and who could help the princess, reviewing all possible options. Troyes realized that her real mistress and nanny had something in common, and at that moment, she was able to pull herself together. She remembered the princess's words that she should not interfere and that an ordinary maid would not be of any use and walked away. The next day, the nanny announced her departure and asked Carnophilia to avoid problems during her absence. When she finally left, the man whom the princess had been waiting for so much knocked on the door. It was Troyes, who had fallen at her mistress's feet, apologizing for her inaction, but Carnophilia did not see any sincerity in her words. She knew what the position of the maid was and how large her family was, asking about her preference and who she would serve. Tears poured down Troy's face, and Carnophilia saw no fear of her death in her, but simply felt guilty for not standing up for her. She forgave her and offered mutual aid, and promised to find a way to survive in the imperial palace, patting her head to calm her down. Cheering her up with warm words, the princess could not imagine that the maid could look so determined. Getting down on one knee, Troy swore that she now undertook to serve the second princess and did not dare to betray her. Carnophilia paid a visit to the emperor, but he was not very happy about his daughter's presence and recent antics. More recently, the girl learned that her birthday celebration will take place in the Western Banquet Hall. She was grateful to her father for prioritizing, as everyone knew that this was the room for the third princess, Renabella. Carnophilia called one of the servants to her to raise the issue of the banquet hall, asking for advice to deliberately convey the information to the empress. At the dinner table, the girl thanked for the early visit and the cooked food, which she hesitantly touched. The emperor noticed this and chuckled, hoping for something more than the usual fear of poisoning. Touching on the topic of changing the banquet hall, as it could belittle her position in the queue for the throne, wondering about the possibility of a third princess inheriting the throne. The emperor asked the servants to come out, not fully understanding what was going on in Carnophilia's head. She convinced him of her abilities and how pleased he would be to watch the confrontation between her and Jenfried, which increased his father's interest. In the empress's chambers, the maid announced that a banquet in honor of the second princess's birthday would be held in the southern hall. She looked into her eyes in fear, but Rachel managed to pick up a heavy object to take out her anger on the servant. Her plans went awry, as the overthrow of Arelithine guaranteed her high status, and she decided to come to her personally. Before she could greet the empress, Rachel slapped her in the face. The empress was furious, and Arelitina boldly took her hand. She had not been able to raise her eyes before, which surprised her. The girl confidently explained that the status of empress did not serve as a guarantee for her, and she was a shining example. Rachel couldn't help but remind her of her son, whom she had easily disposed of and would be able to repeat his fate on Arelithine, but they were interrupted by a man's voice. This was the emperor, who listened to the words of the empress and was interested in the methods of eliminating the first prince. The man was worried about Arelitina's well-being, and Rachel sincerely did not understand what caused his addiction to her. At this rate, competition will arise, and subsequently it could lose its throne. Carnophilia was glad that the rumors had spread faster than necessary, and the empress's reaction was worth her expectations. The girl was also worried about the return of the nanny. She did not want her to miss all the fun. When she returned, her face was filled with rage, and she couldn't believe that the princess had advanced so much. Entering the room, Carnophilia sat in front of her, bleeding from her nose and a doctor sitting next to her. The nurse scolded the servants for calling the court doctor for such a trifle, noting the girl's sickness from birth. The woman was unhappy that this fact was hidden from her, and she looked at her with contempt. Carnophilia asked to be escorted back to her chambers, and she realized that she was on the verge of dismissal due to the fact that she had been working as a court physician for many years. When the nanny and the heroine were left alone, she began to underestimate the status of the princess, forcing her to thank her for giving her such a caring servant as her. Carnophilia only smiled in response and decided to remind her that now everything was different, and she had long had the right to claim the throne. And she also began to understand that she could make independent decisions, and Lel stood in front of the nanny threateningly. Now she had the right not only to hire a worker for her service, but also to dismiss them. The princess removed her from her position as nanny, and the butlers led the woman out of the chambers, leaving a shock on her face after what had happened. After she left her position, Troyes reported that gossip about betrayal began to circulate around the palace, and Carnophilia offered to follow her. The maid could not believe her words, as she was well aware that she was not suitable for the role of a spy. But the princess decided to find a more suitable option for her and was sure that she would soon find something to occupy her. Lela knocked on the door and handed her a letter, the sight of which made Troyes shiver, for she knew who the sender was. It was an invitation from the third princess, Renabella, who was looking forward to her sister's arrival. When she came to see her, she welcomed her with open arms in her doll's house, which was the princess's favorite place in the palace. Only the doll's house was not exactly a child's game. She had an unusual hobby. She loved to play with dolls, using her servants instead. Renabella showed one of her dolls. They were forced to suffer as they were unlucky with their mistress. Carnophilia could not help them in any way, which made the atmosphere in the room creepy. She joined her, asking if she wanted to be friends with her, promising that she would support her like a real princess, putting her before the choice of giving herself up as a doll that can be used or giving her eyes. The heroine only laughed, comparing Renabella to her older brother, explaining that she should watch her manners, as she was higher in status. The nanny said a lot to her younger sister, and this did not suit Carnophilia, since compared to her, she could claim the throne. Instead, the princess gave her her servants as some kind of gift, pointing out that they were her older brother's workers, and Renabella was satisfied with this. Meanwhile, in the Svenbach family, the head of the family was looking for a cure for a mysterious disease that struck his son. To find out information on his whereabouts, the elder sister, Preta, decided to go to a banquet on the occasion of the princess's birthday. She couldn't wait to see the crown prince to look him in the eye, even though he was dangerous. She was well aware of the relationship between the families, but she had to understand who would take the throne and understand who she would have to deal with. They did not know about the second princess. Her character and motives remained a mystery. It was important for the girl to enlist support and be confident in her abilities so as not to attract attention to herself. The day of the banquet came and Preta was already in the imperial palace. She and Naskan needed to find the princess. In order to maintain his position, each of the heirs tried to find as many acquaintances among the aristocrats as possible. The girl was looking at the banquet hall and warned Naskan that the princess had prepared herself and had not chosen such a large room for nothing. Preta assumed that it could be an ordinary child's whim or something more, and Carnophilia herself appeared in the audience. She turned to the guests and thanked them for their presence. Complete indifference could be seen in their looks. Her attention was attracted by a man who deliberately dropped a glass of wine on the floor. It was the Marquis, a moneylender who profited from the poverty of the lower classes, and it was known to everyone that he was a close friend of the second prince. It was rude of him to behave like that at the banquet, but Carnophilia was not in the least hurt by it. She only stood with a smile among his retinue, who were loyal only to the second prince. Pret and Naskan were also noticed, and they were concerned about the emperor's purpose in organizing the banquet. The girl knew that the heir was sponsored with dirty money, and the princess was surrounded by main sponsors. They decided to leave, hoping that the heroine would cope with the test and prove that she was worthy of the throne, then their family would provide worthy support. Carnophilia addressed the audience and would be glad if those present would give a worthy welcome to a special guest. A girl appeared on the balcony and those around her could not believe their eyes, considering it all a hallucination. A special guest was Aralatina, who joyfully greeted the others. The princess went up to her and smiled back, and they exchanged compliments. She was pleased that the dress that was intended for Marie saw the light of day on the new owner. Carnophilia had a request for Aralatina to become her never-setting moon. Meanwhile, Genfried appeared at the palace, who had come for his sister's birthday. The princess asked Arelatine to be her godmother in front of the public, subtly hinting that she could be the next son of the empire. For her, it was not just a request, it was only a joy for her to take care of Carnophilia. She stated that she accepted her offer with honor and was ready to become her moon. The guests began to whisper among themselves. As for them, it meant joining forces against the second prince. In the hall, everyone began to part before the eldest son, whose arrival was a surprise. When he arrived, the celebration was in full swing. Initially, Yenfried wanted to visit his mother and Renabella, but decided to stop by the banquet. The prince looked at Carnophilia from head to toe, comparing her appearance to the poisonous flower she looked so much like. He let her survive because he didn't know how far she could advance, and was surprised that the princess wasn't afraid of him. In her previous life, she must have trembled in fear at his presence and diligently kept her composure. His eyes fell on Arelatina. He realized that he had missed the main event and greeted Her Majesty. Carnophilia spoke of Yenfried's blessing and his power of foresight, which made him chuckle. The prince lowered himself and said that his life would be much more boring if he could see the future by pointing to his sister's young age. But the princess laughed and shared that it would be better to look ahead and find out what choices should be made to change it. A nanny was also present in the hall, who heard the guests whispering among themselves, hinting that Carnophilia had a blessing. She knew that the princess shouldn't lie, she needed to silence her, and she turned to her. The heroine recognized her, and the nanny was glad that she had not forgotten the nanny, but still behaved cautiously in the presence of the prince. She brought a cake on the occasion of the princess's birthday and reminded them that the last time they had celebrated it together alone, and there was no question of a sumptuous banquet. In the past, Carnophilia would have cried with joy and jumped into her arms, but unfortunately everything changed for her and smiled broadly. The banquet was also attended by the emperor himself, whose arrival shocked everyone present. Many were worried that His Majesty was in the same room with the current and former empress, which infuriated Rachel. He approached his children, who kindly greeted him as the never-setting son of the empire, and bowed. The nurse looked at the princess and was surprised at how calm and well-dressed she was, in which she was justly worthy of being called the hostess of the banquet. Carnophilia turned to her father and thanked him for his visit, promising that she would use the power he had given her in the best possible way and would not let her down. They were approached by Arelithine, whom the emperor drew to him and embraced, calling her beauty dazzling. The princess's gaze did not pass by the nanny, and she asked to bring a cake that was prepared especially for her. Turning to the emperor, Carnophilia wanted to remember the days spent together and eat a piece to enjoy the moment. The heroine put forward a speech in which she could not imagine that she would celebrate her birthday so grandly, and thanked the guests. Everyone accompanied the speech with thunderous applause, and Arelitina congratulated her once again. But Her Majesty's face changed when she saw Carnophilia choking and coughing up blood. Princess wanted to show the public that they were a force to be reckoned with. Even then, the heroine asked Arelitina to play along with her, although the details of the plan were not revealed, but she trusted her. She was frightened now as she held Carnophilia in her arms. After that, chaos reigned in the banquet, and the empress turned to her husband, accusing him of inaction. Her eyes were filled with tears, reminding her of the incident when he allowed the child to die right in front of her eyes. She continued to reproach him that history would repeat itself again, and the emperor would pretend to be blind like last time. His Majesty called a doctor, and it turned out that the princess had been poisoned with the poison of Carnophilia, which made him not even surprised. Preta stood aside and listened to the gossip of the guests that the curse itself was to blame for the poisoning, and irritation could be read on her face. Nascan winked at her and suggested that the emperor would get to the bottom of the truth and find the culprit. Otherwise, everyone will think that it was his work, although he understood who was involved. Then Renabella intervened in bewilderment and realized that her sister would soon recover, since the nurse gave her medication every day. She was joined by Jenfried, who remembered that she had brought a cake to the banquet, which caused his sister to drop dead. The emperor did not hesitate and ordered the guards to seize her immediately. The nurse tried to make His Highness change her mind, explaining that someone had framed and poisoned the princess instead of her. Meanwhile, Carnophilia was lying in bed, and Arelitina was anxiously tossing from side to side until there was a knock at the door. It was Preta who introduced herself to Her Majesty and promised to help. She could use her divine power to cleanse the princess's body of poison. When everyone was in the banquet hall, Lel was pushing a barrel of oil in Carnophilia's chambers. The maid was acting according to her mistress's plan. She needed to burn the princess's palace to the ground. When Lel left the manor, she burned her uniform so that the guards would not notice her. Preta's words shocked Arelithine, who was unaware of the divine power. Since the imperial family received a blessing from God, while the girl's family was granted divine power, they were both well aware that their families were not on the best terms, but they had one thing in common: to save the life of the princess. When Preta came up to her, the room shone brightly, and Carnophilia's face was healed, but she did not recover. The girl asked Arelitina to talk to the princess to speed up the process. The heroine moved to her past when she was already an adult and not a child. She was standing in the room where Jenfried had given his consent to the engagement between Carnophilia and Helis. He was happy, as it meant that there would be no war between their families now. But his face changed when the prince broke the news of the death of Helis's mother. Carnophilia rushed to him with concern to cheer him up, but the man said that he was fine and there was no need to worry about him. During the funeral, white lilies were prepared, which Helis presented to the graves of his parents. The girl wanted to help him and put flowers with him, but the guide distantly asked not to help him and would do everything himself. After a while, Carnophilia and Hellas became engaged. They were also invited to the proclamation of a new emperor. It was Yenfried, who congratulated the newlyweds and discussed their personal lives since they had not appeared together before. Hellas didn't show any emotions or feelings in public. He was very nervous in the presence of the emperor. The audience forced the guy to kiss his wife, and Carnophilia in her head asked them to be quiet. Most recently, an imperial order was issued, in which the Duchy of Hellas must provide funds to the treasury of the empire, which horrified the girl. Yenfried assured his sister that now she would not be bored, and she begged to take her life in order to grant her husband freedom. She was ready to fulfill any request, and the brother could not look at his sister's tears. Carnophilia continued to cry, and he told her that the duke would pay for causing her so much pain. She could not bear to see Hellas suffer and was ready to kill Yenfried with her own hands. Preda was glad when she saw how the princess's cheeks turned pink, and she began to come to her senses. When the girl began to leave, she asked to tell her that she was waiting for the next meeting. Nascan was waiting for her outside the door and was unhappy that the room outside was glowing with divine power, and they hurried. Preda's presence at the banquet was conveyed to Yenfried according to the servants who were witnesses. He was interested in the motives of Carnophilia, as she was able to capture the attention of the aristocracy. He thought about how the lady could get into the palace and thought about those involved and who could help her. A maid burst into his room and reported that the second princess had been able to wake up, and the healer said that without the blessing she could not have woken up and that Yenfried was angry. Rachel was also aware of the princess's awakening, and they revealed that she was waiting to meet at the palace. The empress was outraged by her impudence and wanted to order the servants to refuse admission, but still agreed to let her in. Arelithine was also present in the dining room, and her mere presence infuriated Rachel. Carnophilia reassured that everyone was worried about her condition after the incident in the banquet hall. She also turned to her with a question, and the desire of the empress that she would die, and Yenfried could ascend the throne. Then she offered to find a criminal who dared to poison her and desecrate the reputation of the empress, which took Rachel by surprise. After a while, Carnophilia and Arelitina left the empress and walked together, discussing their future plans. Yenfried came out to meet them. His sister's appearance justified the rumors, and noted that she still had the strength to look at him. The prince did not hide his sadness that the princess really survived and was still a rival in the struggle for the throne. She told him about her purpose of her visit to the empress and that she had received permission to investigate. She was now allowed to interrogate the criminal. There was fury in Yenfried's head that Carnophilia was getting on his nerves and interfering with his plans. The heroine did not understand why he did this and promised that the prince would soon find out whether she had received a blessing or not. The princess thanked him for the conversation and left him alone. Yenfried liked his sister's character as opposed to the first prince and hoped that she would not disappoint him in the future. Carnophilia was going to the dungeon, where the nurse was with the rest of the servants. She looked at the cage, looking at the woman with an indifferent look, and she addressed her by her first name. Evelyn. The surprise on her face was not interesting, as if she saw a ghost. Evelyn was shocked that she was able to survive, and Carnophilia leaned over to explain that the previous princess she knew was gone. She wanted to talk to Her Majesty, but the heroine said that she had received permission to do with her as she wanted, and the woman was terrified. Evelyn confessed that Rachel had ordered her to poison the princess, but Carnophilia had known about it for a long time and gave the nanny a chance when she suspended her. It dawned on her that she should have escaped back then, but the princess realized that she had not taken her chance and was now facing execution. The heroine was still smiling, convincing the nanny that this was only the beginning and was determined to go to the end. While still in the emperor's office, she asked her father to suspend the investigation into the poisoning case, which surprised him. Carnophilia wanted him to put all the evidence of Evelyn's involvement in the hands of Arelitine, but he knew that this was not all the demands his daughter wanted. The emperor understood the princess's course of action and asked her to speak directly, as he would be willing to do anything she asked. It was a deal, and the heroine was confident in herself because she had the right and knew her place in the family. The aristocracy had no respect for the royal family. They were pawns for them with which to assert their power. Therefore, one of the conditions was to cleanse the reputation of the current empress from involvement in the poisoning, although the emperor did not show such love for her. In return, she promised to bring a legal letter from a certain marquis, which made her father much more interested in her words. And the last promise was that she would get rid of half of the aristocrats before the day of the coming-of-age ceremony. She was well aware that what her father wanted most of all was to increase power in the empire, so he could not refuse the deal. The emperor was interested in the benefit, and Carnophilia preferred to hold it until she achieved one of the goals. Meanwhile, in the capital, the breathless girl returned to her room. She was happy with the exclusive that she was able to collect during the celebration of the princess's birthday. The only thing that bothered her was that someone from the royal family wanted to spread rumors throughout the empire. Since a few days ago she received an invitation to a banquet, and the letter was anonymous, although she could not refuse the offer. The sender had a request that the journalist be able to remember as many details as possible, and everyone's attention to the princess helped her go unnoticed. The only thing that remains unclear is why they chose her, but she is glad that they did not make a mistake in the choice. The girl immediately began to spread rumors within the capital, as everyone needed to know the original reason, who dared to poison the princess. Jenfried's propaganda began to be published in all the newspapers, and his reputation began to decline sharply. The only person who could write about the prince in a bad way was Natalie, who had already been taken into custody. Jenfried offered her a small amount if she wrote what he ordered, and it was not to Natalie's advantage, since society had the right to know the truth. She could not recognize him as a fair emperor, and her words made the prince laugh because he was not going to be honest. In a past life, Natalie was beheaded for desecrating the reputation of the royal family. Carnophilia was glad that the empress was in a panic after the rumors. Lately, Arelatina had been beaming with happiness after the death of her son, and a small victory over Rachel had added strength to her. The princess and Lel were on their way to the emperor to pay him a visit, which was already waiting for her. He was furious and scattered newspapers with gossip about the incident at the banquet, and Carnophilia pretended that she had nothing to do with the distribution. She explained that it was not her doing, as she was distinguished by her sickness, and the princess pronounced it with complete confidence. The princess made me take a closer look at her and examine her from head to toe, because a bedridden person cannot leave the palace. Carnophilia also reminded about her servants and whether their death is the only way out, asking for permission to pardon. When she wanted to leave, her father called out to her and asked about the bright light in the room when his daughter was fighting for her life. The heroine did not want to interfere with Preta in her affairs and explained that it was a reflection from the Golden Castle, which suited the emperor. Walking in the street with Lel, Carnophilia turned to her maid with a request. She needed to find Preta and Nascan while remaining unnoticed so as not to arouse suspicion. Since the emperor began to guess about their communion, and therefore the heroine needed to protect them, Carnophilia returned to the dungeon where Empress Rachel's servants were being held and looked at them without showing emotion. They were just as surprised at her presence, for they did not suspect that the princess was strong and alive. Troyes was glad to see her mistress. She worried about her more than the others and could not hide her tears of happiness. The heroine was surprised by the girl's reaction because the maid was a tool that she used for her own purposes. The other servants echoed Troyes' words and expressed their concern for the princess, although Carnophilia did not hear any sincerity in their words. They began to worry that they were now about to be executed, and at that moment Jenfried came up from behind, who was glad to hear that they would be executed. The servants were glad to see His Highness, for they knew that he would rescue them from the dungeon and save them from death. But their faces changed to shock when Jenfried said that a servant had immediately executed her and did not put her behind bars. Carnophilia stopped him and said that she would pardon the maids, to which the prince compared her to the first prince, who was killed for his gentleness. He did not understand why his sister was so confident, and he wanted to know what kind of support she had enlisted to ruin all her plans. Jenfried hoped that the heroine would be a worthy competitor to him, as he was tired of wiping the blood of relatives from his hands and left. Carnophilia told the maids that Evelyn's tongue had been cut out and she intended to find the criminal she served. When she let them go, her order was to go to the Empress's palace and confess the identity of the culprit. The princess asked Troyes about her actions and whether the servants appreciated what she had done for them, and the maid replied in the affirmative, but it was not what she desired. In the palace of Carnophilia sat Arelatine, who was preoccupied with something. The heroine noticed this, and she was interested to find out the reason for her bad mood. It turns out that she was worried about the future of the princess's home because recent events have caused a lot of noise. This also meant that Arelithina would soon move to live with His Majesty, which showed her importance to the emperor. She turned to Carnophalia to find out her food preferences and become closer, like her own mother. It was important to her that the princess took care of herself, and this caused her mixed feelings. Arelithina's attitude reminded her that she was still a child, and she was pleased to know that someone was taking care of her. Lela came into the room, who fell on her knee anxiously and bowed before the princess. She was frightened and worried that she could not be near her mistress, and Carnophalia asked for forgiveness as she could not fully reveal her plans. In the past, the heroine lost many people close and dear to her, including Lel, promising that now she would protect them. The next day, Arelithina and the princess were in their father's study, talking about a new place to live and suggesting a ruby palace, an option she did not like. And she wanted to stop at Carnophalia, staying in the Platinum Palace. The emperor was shocked and indignant, as none of the children were worthy of living in it. His refusal was expected, and the heroine had a request that he give her permission to leave the castle. Her father did not want to agree, but approved, and she was already standing in the street, surrounded by knights and maids, to set out. The only requirement was to return before sunset, and the princess took note of this, happily jumping into the carriage. When they left, Jenfried also came, who wanted to see his sister off and asked where she had gone. They were on their way to Mount Krubal to pray, and the prince pondered, as the path to it was equipped with dangerous roads and weather. He was anxious to know what the princess was up to, for he guessed that she had not chosen such a place for a walk just like that. Carnophalia had already arrived at her destination and thanked the escorts for such a difficult journey with her. Together with everyone else, they went deep into the forest to make a tower of stones to pray. The princess said that they are being built here to honor the memory of those who died. This infuriated one of the knights, who was an unbeliever and saw no use in her actions. It began to rain abruptly, and everyone wanted to return, but the road was blocked by stones, which caused panic. Carnophalia smiled, as it was to her advantage and was part of her plan. Lights could be seen in the distance, and strangers came out of the depths of the forest, who had come from a local shelter and came to check if anyone needed help. Those present accepted their help and went to a house located on the very outskirts. One of the knights was looking around the house inside and was on guard, but the princess reassured him that it was safe and there was nothing to worry about. When everyone had gone to their rooms, Carnophalia was attracted by the walls, which had strange crevices. In one of these walls there was a secret passage, through which she was met by a young guy. It was Naskan, who introduced himself by his full name and asked to follow him as he was short on time. In the distance stood Prada, who had been waiting for the princess's visit for a long time. She noticed an exact resemblance between her and Hellas, and in the past, after losing her entire family, she committed suicide. Carnophalia bowed to them and introduced herself, recognizing her as the future heiress of the family, which surprised them. The heroine could not allow the past to manipulate her and therefore showed respect. Preda was interested in the princess's well-being, and the kindness towards her did not change, which complicated the situation. Getting down to business, the girl said that her younger brother was on the verge of death and asked for help to help her. She was ready to provide the necessary assistance, provided that Preda's family did not show a desire to become allies by revealing their plans. The girl was surprised by the statement. She did not understand why the princess did not want to be on the same side. But the Duchess agreed with her, and agreed to the terms, as she should strengthen the position of her family. Carnophalia was ready to give a hint in order to influence the aristocrats, but in return asked to sign a contract where her family would not interfere. It was important to her that Preda and Naskan remained neutral and would not participate in the princess's revenge. A couple of men knocked on the door. They were knights who had been presented to defend Carnophalia. The heroine confidently said that she was not going to die so early, and one of them rushed at her with a sword. Before he could approach, he fell dead to the floor, begging for mercy, but the princess did not listen to him and smiled as usual. A couple of minutes later, Troyes burst into the room and announced that she had found something worthy of the princess's attention. Carnophalia had a reason why the meeting with Preda ended up in the orphanage, as one of the emperor's children managed to survive. No one knew about this child, not even the current empress with the second prince, and she opened the curtain to take a look at him. It was a boy named Xerxian, who was surprised that someone had found him. In the heroine's memoirs, the third prince was still a small child, who was distinguished by his modesty and innocence. Even then, Carnophalia did not suspect that his bright smile would disappear forever, and this was their last meeting. Xerxes did not know her, and the princess gave him a helping hand, wanting to save and help him. After all, if he continues to run away and hide, then one day he will be found, so he should enlist support. Nascan took him with him, promising that they could be trusted and would be able to protect him from danger. The boy asked about the next meeting, and Carnophalia promised that she would play with him very soon, and asked him to focus on getting stronger. Xerxes was still worried, and Nascan reassured him that he no longer had to worry about being spied on and that no one would kill him. The meeting ended with the fact that they took the boy with them for further maintenance, but the business was not over yet. The next morning, the princess was surrounded by children who admired her person and could not take their eyes off her. One of the workers offered to have breakfast in privacy, but she wanted to eat in the presence of the children so that she would not be lonely. A warm atmosphere swirled around them. Each child considered the princess an adult and wanted to become exactly the same, calling her an ideal. Carnophalia approached the worker and wanted to know why she had accepted her offer to support the shelter, without ruling out the consequences. The woman said that she is ready to do everything possible for the children, who are desperately trying to climb the mountain to find shelter. The princess was amazed at the bravery of the workers and that it helped save the boy, whom she took and thanked for the risks she was taking. Carnophalia offered to move to the orphanage in Karnas and gave a bag of money to provide transportation, which made the woman cry with happiness. Meanwhile, in the empire, the father was worried about the fate of his daughter, since she did not return and was sure that she would return with something interesting. To make the death of the knights look more natural, the princess had to faint and become the victim of an attack by bandits. Everyone looked at the young soldier with suspicion. He was the only one who managed to return without a scratch. The guy refused to talk about what happened and therefore he was imprisoned. Carnophalia came to him and the guy understood that it was his turn to die. He looked at her suspiciously, as he realized that she was faking it when she lost consciousness, and she lied to everyone. The princess admitted that the knight wanted her dead and advised her to hide her emotions before plotting revenge. She named the man Tang, knowing his past and that he was once a slave, and promised to help him carry out his revenge. In his study, the emperor discussed what had happened and was calm, amazed at the stupidity of the empress when she sent the knights. For him, it was elementary that one soldier was enough to frighten Carnophalia, but not to kill her. The chamberlain handed over a letter sent by the Duchy of Svenbach, which spoke of a personal meeting, and the emperor was looking forward to it. A few days later, Preta arrived at the palace and greeted the son of the empire. She had been here as a child and had been quite a long time since her last visit. The girl said that she had arrived here to report that her family had found a child of imperial blood, which surprised the man. He couldn't believe it, as he had long taken care of all the illegitimate children by the will of the empress and didn't know about any child. They would be happy to end his life on his orders, but first they needed proof that he had imperial blood in him. Preta learned that the child's mother was Lena, and that he had golden hair like the emperor himself. He asked to bring the Holy Grail to test their blood on the holy water and cut his finger to make sure. As soon as the drop of blood came into contact with the water, it left no trace, which meant that the child really belonged to imperial blood. Preta did not want to give the boy to the palace, comparing him to the second princess, and the emperor was surprised that her family was interested in Carnophalia as well. He suggested choosing a more secluded place to talk, and the guards appeared around the girl and grabbed her. She was blindfolded, and the emperor ordered Preta to be locked up, treating her carefully, for further conversation. The heroine reflected on the fate of Svenbach, since most of the events were different from her past life, and now everything depends on the lady. Her mother was supposed to come instead, and later, during a banquet on the occasion of Renabella's birthday, an incident occurred that led to her being imprisoned. Now, instead of her mother, Preta is in the dungeon, and this time the Swiebach family must survive, just like Helis. If she had more opportunities, she ran to the duchy and confessed her love and said that she would do anything to cure him. Abruptly, an image of Helis appeared in the princess's head, whose eyes were crossed out and they were not visible. This frightened the heroine, and she abruptly woke up in horror, and it made no sense for her to imagine their reunion, and it would be better if they were apart. Carnophilia was on her way to the Imperial Library, and Troy was interested in this because the princess had not previously shown attention to education. Entering inside, the maids could not enter, as well as accompany her. Instead, she was met by a worker. The princess was interested in books about diseases and methods of their treatment. In front of her there were huge cabinets filled from top to bottom. The heroine realized that there were dissimilarities in Preda's story. Although he was a child and had little power, but Hellas was also born with divine powers, wielding which made it difficult to get sick. The worker wondered why Carnophilia had decided to go to the library, and she told him that she was tired of the constants and would do well to read about antidotes. Suddenly, the court physician appeared, who did not understand why she was looking for books, and it was enough for her to purify the poison with divine powers. She was interested in information about divine powers without the help of her father, and the appearance of the healer was successful. The woman immediately understood the princess's motives and took the initiative to help find out the necessary information, although Carnophilia did not trust her. The doctor was surprised by the behavior of the princess, as she believed that all aristocrats behave vulgarly, and also wanted to help another person. She decided to give her advice that instead of wasting her energy on someone else, she should first take care of herself. But the heroine took the words of the healer as rudeness and asked not to interfere in her affairs. The princess told her story, and the woman smiled, realizing that it was not a child at all in front of her, and she could stand up for her interests. Before leaving, the healer asked to send one of the servants to the farthest room of the palace for a meeting. She said that she had copies of books that she secretly copied at the very beginning of her work and would be happy to share. Carnophilia did not expect such kindness from the servants of the imperial palace and was grateful to her. When the heroine finished with her business, she and the maids noticed how a carriage of aristocrats arrived at the palace. The heroine immediately recognized them and realized that her plan began to work after the shocking news regarding the found child. The princess turned to Troyes to inform her of her visit to Arelathan and the former maids. She immediately bowed out to check on them and find out how they were doing, because very soon they would have to leave the palace. Lel was also given an errand. She had to visit the healer and pick up the book that she would give and do it secretly. In the main palace, all the aristocrats gathered to hear explanations about the rumors in the capital, which made the emperor dissatisfied. The rumors were true. After the second princess gained the right to claim the throne, another child was born who could enter the struggle for the throne. Everyone present needed to find a child to eliminate, and the emperor did not want this, since he had already lost the first prince. One of those present was the Marquis, who was interested in the fate of the child, and as it turned out, His Majesty's order was to provide care and safety. He was interested in his whereabouts, and his tip was the Nazcan family, who could have sheltered the boy with them. The Marquis visited their house, pointing out that they had crossed the line for the neutral side and began to search the house. The head of the family wanted to write a complaint, but the man interrupted him because the Duke signed a union with the second prince, and it was time to prove his loyalty. Standing at the door, the Marquis was nervous because the knights could not find the presence of the child in the house. As they left, the head of the family scolded Nazcan for his ties to the Svenbach family and the consequences of it. He calmed his father and explained that everything was under control and there was no need to worry, asking to open a secret passage in the house. The man did not know that his son was really hiding the emperor's child, but he got into the situation and did not punish him. Meanwhile, Natalie visited an unknown man under the guise of a package on behalf of Nazcan. Everyone was shocked by her appearance and wanted to turn her in to the emperor until she revealed that she had an important message. Natalie showed him a child who needed to be hidden for a while and saved life. The book that Carnophilia received contained information about the imperial family and the divine power that was a spec for the emperor. It stated that all humans had the ability to absorb divine power, but each person had a different potential. It also happened that the strength disappeared overnight, and in such a case, the body cannot withstand a sharp loss of strength. Subsequently, the body begins to weaken or even fatally fall ill like Hellas. The reason why humans lost their divine power is unknown, but Carnophilia speculated that her curse might have something to do with their loss. She couldn't believe that she could be involved in his illness, wanting not to be associated with him so that Hellas could gain freedom. Everything went awry, and the princess informed Lel that she needed to meet with Zented urgently. Arelatina was not aware of the matter, and only asked Carnophilia to be more careful, warning that the man was a serious opponent. From her memories, she remembered that Zentaid was one of the main followers of the first prince, and after his death, his son was killed by the second prince. After renouncing society, the man fell ill, and if the heroine did nothing, he would soon die, so she had to hurry. Carnophilia arrived at the old house and was confident in her abilities, asking Lel to stay outside. Zentaid sat in a chair, as if he already knew that the princess would come to him in person, and it was clear from his appearance how much he despised the imperial family. The princess could note his deep hatred. It was not easy for him to be in the same room with her, but he tried his best to treat her with respect. She thanked him for the meeting and expressed her condolences for the loss of her son, whom he loved very much and could not accept his loss. Carnophilia exhaled, as she knew how hard it was for him, and his anger towards her family was justified. The princess was glad that his revenge did not go anywhere, and he gave up and did not forgive those who brought him a lot of pain. She wanted to reveal to him the truth that the emperor was hiding behind his horrible deeds. This was reinforced by her desire for strong revenge and the death of the entire imperial family, and intends to prove it by paying the enemies for the sins of Zentaides. The man was carried away by Carnophilia's proposal and wanted to hear the details of the princess's plan. The heroine wanted to deprive the emperor of the status of the family and turn the lives of its members into a living hell, and the man asked if she was afraid of being cursed. Carnophilia confidently replied that she was not afraid of either death or blessing, as well as the consequences that could come after. Zentaid had a condition that she would kill the person responsible for the death of his son, and asked what she wanted in return. Seeing the carriage with her eyes, the princess had a rather simple desire that made him uncomfortable: to take care of his health. The next day, Carnophilia was glad that Natalie and Zerzian were safe. Arelathine's voice brought the princess back from her thoughts and said that everything was fine. She also revealed that during the tea party with the emperor, she would ask to hire a teacher for Carnophilia in order to unlock her potential. In the presence of His Majesty, the heroine said that she wanted to study state administration, which amazed everyone. Since the princess couldn't learn it on her own, she needed a teacher, causing the emperor to laugh loudly. Carnophilia explained that she possessed the blessing of foresight of the future, reminding her of the banquet when she was poisoned. To prove her words, she demanded a platinum palace. The emperor did not want to give it away just like that, but agreed, expecting more benefit from her predictions in the future. He promised to hire a group of scientists for training, and Arelatina and the princess breathed a sigh of relief. Now the main business was over, and Carnophilia was waiting for the move of her new pawn. Zentaid arrived at the imperial palace in disbelief that he had returned as if in a nightmare. On the threshold, he was met by the emperor in anticipation of the arrival of a man. He was still trembling in the presence of His Majesty. As he poured the wine, the smell and taste brought back long-forgotten memories of Zentaid. The emperor did not understand why he, as well as Arelatine, preferred to return to him after the death of their children. It was important for him to restore relations with him, as Zentaid was beneficial to him in his plans. As it turned out, the man had come for one reason: to give his last advice, and the emperor was surprised to focus on the latter. Zentaid asked for Lady Svenbach's freedom and sent her back home, as the girl's imprisonment has consequences. He was also interested in the recent search of Naskan's house, and that it was done on official orders, and that it caused the emperor to question the loyalty of the aristocrats. The chamberlain offered to escort Zentaides back, but His Majesty stopped him and asked him to tell him to the end. The man offered to break the people's trust in the second prince and reward Lady Svenbach in order to show the capital good relations. After that, he recommended that the second princess be presented to the duchy and that the forces of the aristocrats weaken, as would the followers of the second prince. The emperor also understood that he did not present a single candidate who would want to follow a princess who did not possess a blessing. At the end of this, he proposed to betroth the second princess to his son, and the cup fell abruptly in Carnophilia's room, as if someone was discussing it. A few days later, a celebration took place in the empire on the occasion of the discovery of a child of imperial blood. The Duchy of Svenbach was officially awarded. It received the privilege of reducing taxes. As a result, the emperor's popularity in the Duchy of Svenbach increased and gained recognition in the capital. And the third prince, despite being illegitimate, was officially recognized as part of the family of the imperial family. Quite a few aristocrats were unhappy with the news and sat quietly so as not to run into the second prince, who was annoyed by the situation. Yenfried approached Preda and advised him not to take what he could not steal. His eyes fell on Carnophilia, and he realized that her participation in the struggle for the throne had increased, and did not believe that she had decided to go against him. The heroine abruptly turned away and walked away so as not to mess with the second prince once again. The princess remarked that the events of her current life were different from the past, and that there would be no war between the imperial family and the Duchy of Svenbach. She was glad, because now the blood of innocent people would no longer be spilled, and Yenfried's death was getting closer. Before leaving, Zarian decided to formally introduce himself to his father, not hiding his excitement. He swore that he would return safe and sound because the boy was able to impress the aristocrats. At that moment, Carnophilia was notified of her upcoming engagement, which left her perplexed. She did not expect anything new, and looking at Zentade, she considered the offer quite profitable and not worth thinking too much. The man looked at the princess and did not understand why Carnophilia was upset and saddened by what she heard. Upon returning home, Aurelitina was concerned about the princess's anxiety and asked what was wrong. As it turned out, Her Majesty would visit Chenistan, and she offered to join the meeting, although it was not necessary. Chenistan was part of Aureletina's family, and she gladly accepted the offer as it was an important event. Their meeting was quite terrible, and Carnophilia was not satisfied with the fact that the man considered the situation in the empire calm. The princess expressed her admiration for him and, with his permission, wanted to warn him of the coming events. She stared into his eyes and told him that what he called peace would not last long, and everything would collapse. Carnophilia's words made Aurelitina tense and regretted that she had introduced the princess to her father. The heroine saw the anxiety in the behavior of the empress and asked not to worry, because Chenistan's behavior was justified. She felt that very soon they would meet again, and this time his attitude would change, which the heroine was looking forward to. Sitting in the emperor's study, Carnophilia asked her father to give her land for her needs. He suggested that the princess wanted to mend fences with Chenistan, but that was not what Carnophilia really wanted. In fact, she wanted to give the land to Aurelithine, as his love for her was the emperor's weakness. He said he loved her, but he had no idea what it was like to love someone back and what it was like to be loved. She wanted to please her moon, because the emperor had taken away everything that belonged to the empress. After the visit of Zentides, His Majesty greatly increased his defense against Yenfried, receiving worthy support. The emperor ordered Chenistan to be brought to the office, explaining that he had urgent business, and when he arrived he was trembling with fear. When Carnophilia saw him, she smiled back, glad that their paths had crossed.